The weight of expectation sat heavily on Amani's shoulders, pressing down like an unseen force. Every woman in her family had walked this path before her, stepping into arranged marriages with quiet dignity, fulfilling their duty without question. She was expected to do the same. From the moment she was born, her fate had been sealed. Her future belonged not to her own dreams, but to the prosperity and reputation of her family. Her mother, Mama Zabida, had spent the morning reminding her of this. "Amani, a woman's duty is to bring honor to her family," she had said firmly as she adjusted the golden necklace around Amani's neck. "Mzee Baraka is a great man. He will provide for you, for your children. You will never know hunger or hardship." Amani nodded out of habit, but her heart was restless. She knew the words by heart, yet they did nothing to ease the storm inside her. Mzee Baraka had arrived at their home earlier that day, his presence as overbearing as the scent of expensive oils that clung to his robes. He was a man of great stature, his belly full from years of wealth and indulgence. His laugh was loud, his voice commanding, his confidence unwavering. When he spoke, everyone listened. He had come bearing extravagant gifts, a chest of ivory carvings, fine silks imported from distant lands, gold bracelets, and cattle that would expand her father's herd. He had spared no expense in claiming her as his bride. Amani's father, Baba Tembo, was pleased. "Daughter," he had said, beaming as he surveyed the treasures, "you are lucky. Not many women are blessed with such a suitor." Lucky. The word felt foreign in her mind. As Mzee Baraka reached for her hand, she fought the urge to pull away. His touch was heavy, his fingers rough from years of trade and battle. He gazed at her with admiration, but it was not the gaze of a man in love. It was the gaze of a man admiring a possession, a prize he had rightfully won. That night, unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere of the celebrations, Amani slipped away to the riverbank, where she often went to clear her thoughts. The sound of rushing water soothed her, a stark contrast to the noise of the village preparing for her wedding. It was there that she found her childhood friend, Zuberi. He sat on a fallen tree trunk, whittling a piece of wood with his small knife. When he saw her, his face lit up, but the joy faded when he noticed her expression. "You don't look happy," he observed, setting down his carving. Amani sighed and sat beside him. "Should I be?" Zuberi hesitated. He had known Amani his entire life, had seen her grow from a curious child into the woman she was now. He knew that she was not one to blindly accept her fate. "You don't have to do this," he said carefully. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't have a choice." "There is always a choice, Amani. But you have to be brave enough to make it." She turned to him, searching his face. "And if I choose wrong? Then at least it will be your choice," he said simply. His words lingered in her mind long after they had parted ways. As she made her way back to the village, the drums and voices of the celebration growing louder, she realized something. For the first time she allowed herself to wonder, what if she refused to go through with the wedding? What if she defied tradition? What if she chose a different fate? The evening air was cool against Amani's skin as she walked through the outskirts of the village, her thoughts tangled in uncertainty. The weight of expectation still pressed upon her, but something inside her had begun to stir, a quiet defiance like embers waiting to ignite. She had been avoiding the main pathways, unwilling to hear more well-wishers congratulating her on her upcoming marriage. Instead, she wandered towards the dense forest beyond the fields, a place she rarely ventured. It was quieter here, away from the endless chatter of the villagers, away from the watchful eyes of her family. As she walked, she heard the snap of a twig nearby. Instinctively she froze. The village elders always warned of wild animals in the forest, but this sound was different, too deliberate, too measured. She turned slowly, her heart quickening. A man stood just a few paces away, partially obscured by the trees. He was tall and lean, his posture relaxed but alert. His clothes were simple but practical, hunting leathers, worn sandals, and a cloak that draped over one shoulder. A quiver of arrows was slung across his back, and a bow rested in his hand. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment neither spoke. Then he stepped forward, his expression curious rather than threatening. "You move quietly for someone who is not a hunter," he observed, his voice rich with amusement. Amani hesitated, unsure whether to answer or retreat. I wasn't trying to be quiet." He smiled, tilting his head slightly. "Then perhaps you are simply meant to be unnoticed." She frowned at the cryptic remark, but there was no malice in his tone. "Who are you?" she asked. "Cato," he replied. "A traveler. A hunter." He gestured toward the carcass of an antelope he had set down beside him. The land has been kind to me today. Amani studied him carefully. He was not from her village, his dialect was slightly different, his features unfamiliar. He carried himself with ease as though he belonged to no one and answered to nothing. "What brings you here?" she asked. Cato shrugged. "I go where the wind takes me. Some places hold me longer than others. Your village is one of them." "Why?" He considered her for a moment before replying. "Because there is something here that does not belong. A spirit caught in a place it was never meant to be." Amani stiffened. "What do you mean?" Cato leaned against a tree, studying her with sharp eyes. "I have traveled many lands, met many people. Some are bound by chains they cannot see. Some live as though they are free but they are caged by expectation. And some know they are not where they are meant to be." His words sent a shiver down her spine. Did he know? Could he see through the mask she had been forced to wear? "You speak in riddles," she said, trying to sound dismissive. He chuckled. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you already know what I mean." Amani opened her mouth to argue but stopped. She didn't have the strength to lie, to herself or to him. Instead, she found herself asking, is there really such a place? Where people are free to choose their own paths? Cato's expression softened. "Yes. But it is not given. It is taken. Freedom does not wait for those who hesitate, it belongs to those who reach for it." His words unsettled her. Her whole life, she had been taught that her duty to her family and her people was more important than her own desires. That love was not about passion or choice but about alliances and survival. But Cato spoke of a different world, one she had never dared to imagine. She wanted to ask more, to understand what such a life could look like. But before she could, distant voices called from the village, breaking the spell between them. Amani turned instinctively toward the sound, knowing she had lingered too long. When she glanced back, Cato had already retrieved his kill and slung it over his shoulder. "Go," he said. "But remember, not all cages have bars." With that, he disappeared into the forest, leaving Amani standing there, her heart racing with a confusion she could not name. When she returned to the village, she noticed the change immediately. People stood in clusters, speaking in hushed voices. Some looked at her as she passed, their eyes filled with curiosity, others with disapproval. By the time she reached her home, her mother was waiting. "Amani," Mama Zabita said, her voice strained. "Where have you been?" Amani hesitated. "By the river," she lied. Her mother exhaled sharply, stepping closer. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Did you speak to the hunter?" The question struck her like a slap. News traveled fast in the village, but she had not expected it to spread so quickly. "What does it matter?" she asked cautiously. Her mother's face darkened. "Amani, you are promised to Mzee Baraka. You cannot be seen speaking with strangers. People are talking." Amani clenched her fists. It had only been a conversation. A simple exchange of words, yet it had caused a storm. "Did he say anything to you?" her mother pressed. "Did he put strange ideas in your head?" Strange ideas. The thought nearly made her laugh. As if the very concept of choice was so foreign that it could only be the work of outsiders. "No," she said, her voice hollow. "Nothing at all." But as she lay in bed that night, staring up at the thatched roof above her, Cato's words echoed in her mind. Not all cages have bars. And for the first time in her life she truly understood what that meant. The days that followed Amani's encounter with Cato were filled with turmoil. Though she had only spoken with him briefly, his words had unsettled something deep within her. The life she had always accepted now felt constricting, like a too tight garment she had outgrown. Yet, duty loomed over her like an unshakable shadow. Her wedding preparations continued, and the village bustled with excitement. Women wove intricate patterns into vibrant fabrics, men constructed a grand feast hall, and her mother busied herself overseeing every detail. To the villagers, this was not just a marriage, it was a union that would strengthen bonds and secure prosperity. But Amani's heart was no longer aligned with their joy. One evening, as she helped her mother grind maize, the older woman spoke without looking up. "You have been restless," Mama Zabita said. "Do not think I have not noticed." Amani hesitated before answering. "It is a big change. It is only natural to feel nervous." Her mother's hand stilled. "This is more than nerves, Amani. You have been distant. Your mind is elsewhere." She paused, then added, "Elsewhere, or with someone?" Amani's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Mama Zabita sighed, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "You think I do not hear the whispers? The villagers talk. They say you were seen speaking with the hunter." Amani swallowed hard. "It was just a conversation." Conversations are dangerous when they plant seeds of doubt, her mother warned. You must understand, this marriage is not only for you. It is for our family. To refuse Mzee Baraka would be an insult. He is generous, powerful. He has given us gifts and soon he will give you security. Security? The word felt like a chain. Her mother placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. You will learn to love him. Love is not always a fire burning bright. Sometimes it is a slow ember, steady and warm. Amani lowered her gaze. And if the fire never comes? Mama Zabita's face tightened. Then you will carry on as women have always done. A growing threat. Meanwhile, Cato's presence had not gone unnoticed by Mzee Baraka. The wealthy suitor prided himself on his status, his wealth, and the control he had over his affairs. He was a man used to getting what he wanted, and he had chosen Amani with the confidence of someone who had never been denied. The news of the hunter's conversation with Amani unsettled him. He had dismissed Cato at first, a wanderer, a nobody. But the change in Amani, the distant look in her eyes, the hesitation in her steps, it all pointed to something more. One afternoon, as Baraka sat with the village elders, he spoke with feigned amusement. I hear we have an unexpected guest in the village, he said, sipping from his calabash. A hunter, I am told. A man with no land, no wealth. Strange, is it not, that such a man lingers where he has no roots? The elders murmured among themselves. Strange indeed, one of them agreed. But he has caused no harm. Baraka leaned forward, his tone light but pointed. Yet it is also strange that since his arrival, my bride-to-be has been distracted. He let the words hang in the air. Surely, we cannot allow outsiders to meddle in the affairs of our people. The elders exchanged looks. They had no love for change, no patience for disruptions to tradition. One of the eldest among them, Baba Omari, nodded. It is true that our ways must be upheld. If this hunter is a threat to our customs, we must ensure he does not interfere. Baraka smiled, satisfied. Then let it be known, Amani is promised to me. Let no man, especially an outsider, forget that. Seeking wisdom. Amani knew that time was slipping through her fingers. If she did nothing, she would be bound to a life she did not choose. But what choice did she truly have? Desperate for guidance, she sought out the one person in the village who might understand. The elder woman, Mama Nia, known for her wisdom and spiritual insight. Mama Nia's hut stood on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by medicinal plants and charms hanging from wooden posts. The old woman sat by a small fire, stirring a clay pot of herbs. Her face, lined with age and knowledge, softened when she saw Amani. Child, she greeted. Your spirit is heavy. Come sit. Amani lowered herself onto the woven mat, folding her hands in her lap. Mama Nia, I do not know what to do. The elder chuckled. Ah, but you do know. You are simply afraid of the answer. Amani's throat tightened. What if my heart wants something my duty forbids? Mama Nia reached for a bundle of dried leaves, crushing them between her fingers before tossing them into the fire. A fragrant smoke curled into the air. Our people have always followed the path of tradition, she said. It is how we survive, how we stay strong. But sometimes the spirits whisper a different path. She gazed into the flames. Tell me, Amani, when you think of Baraka, what do you see? Amani closed her eyes. She saw a future of comfort, stability, and quiet obedience. She saw herself smiling out of duty, bearing children for a man she did not love, living a life mapped out for her by others. And when you think of the hunter? Mama Nia pressed. Amani's heart skipped. She saw open roads and adventure. She saw laughter and freedom. She saw a future she had never dared to dream of. The old woman smiled knowingly. The spirits have already spoken. Tears welled in Amani's eyes. But if I refuse Baraka, my family will suffer. My people will call me selfish. Mama Nia took Amani's hands in her own, her grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me, child. A caged bird sings not because it is happy, but because it knows no other song. If you choose duty over your heart, you will survive, but you will not live. Amani's breath shook. The truth was so simple, so painful. But if I leave, she whispered, I will have nothing. Mama Nia's eyes twinkled. You will have freedom. And in freedom there is everything. Amani sat in silence, the weight of her choice settling deep within her. She had always thought that fate was unchangeable, that she had no power to defy the life chosen for her. But now she realized, perhaps fate was not a thing given. Perhaps it was a thing taken. As she rose to leave, Mama Nia placed a small carved pendant into her palm. For courage, the elders said. You will need it. Amani clutched it tightly, knowing that soon she would have to make the most difficult decision of her life. The village awoke to chaos one morning. A deep sense of fear settled over the people as word spread. Another attack had occurred during the night. Goats were found slaughtered, their remains strewn across the outskirts of the village. The beast had struck again. For weeks, a mysterious predator had been wreaking havoc, killing livestock, and leaving behind clawed earth and eerie silence. No one had seen it clearly, but the devastation it left was undeniable. Farmers whispered of a spirit beast, a creature of darkness sent to test them. Others spoke of a rogue lion, more cunning than any before it. Whatever it was, fear grew with each passing night. At the village square, a meeting was called. Elders and warriors gathered as voices rose in panic. Mzee Baraka arrived in his grand robes, a heavy golden chain draped across his chest. He lifted a hand and silence fell over the crowd. "This beast has tormented us for too long," he declared, his deep voice carrying over the murmurs. "But fear not. I am a man of means and I will see this problem solved." He straightened proudly. "I will pay handsomely to any warrior who slays this creature. Let the bravest among us step forward." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some of the village hunters exchanged glances, but none moved. The stories of the beast were too terrifying. It was said to move like a shadow, striking when least expected. Then a calm voice cut through the silence. "I will go." All eyes turned to the speaker, Cato. Amani's breath caught. He stood tall, his dark eyes steady. Unlike Baraka, who wore gold, Cato carried only his spear and his confidence. His presence, though quieter, held a different kind of power. Baraka scoffed. "A wanderer dares to challenge the beast?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Bravery is admirable, but you are not from this village. Why should we entrust you with our safety?" Cato met his gaze without flinching. "Because your gold cannot kill the beast. A true hunter can." The villagers gasped at his boldness. Amani felt her heart pound. He was challenging Baraka's authority, defying tradition with each word. But deep inside she knew, this was a test of fate. Baraka's face darkened. He had not expected this challenge. "Very well," he said, forcing a smile. "If you succeed you will be rewarded. But if you fail, the consequences are yours to bear." Cato nodded, then turned to the elders. "Give me one night. I will return with proof of my hunt." The elders hesitated, then nodded solemnly. The village held its breath as Cato prepared to face the unknown. Amani's silent prayer. That night, as the village retreated to their huts, Amani could not sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the darkened forest beyond the village. Somewhere out there, Cato was hunting. She clenched her hands together, whispering a silent prayer to the ancestors. She had no right to interfere, no power to change destiny. And yet she hoped. Cato was not just fighting a beast, he was fighting for his place in this world, for the right to be seen as more than an outsider. If he succeeded, he would not only save the village but prove that strength was not measured in gold. Her heart ached at the thought of what might happen if he failed. The hunt. Cato moved through the dense undergrowth with practiced ease. His spear was firm in his grasp, his senses sharp. He had hunted many creatures in his time, but this was different. This was not just about skill, it was about proving something, about rewriting a future that seemed already written. The night was still, but he knew the beast was near. The carcasses it left behind spoke of a creature with great strength, but also intelligence. It was not reckless, it knew when to strike, when to disappear. A rustle in the bushes. Cato stilled, his muscles tensing. The air was thick with the scent of blood. Then, movement. A low growl. His eyes narrowed. There, just beyond the clearing, golden eyes flashed in the darkness. The beast lunged. Cato barely had time to roll aside before claws raked through the air where he had stood. He sprang to his feet, heart pounding. The creature was large, its dark coat blending seamlessly into the night. It was no ordinary lion, it was something more, something ancient. He had no time to marvel. The beast charged again. Cato steadied his spear, waiting for the right moment. One breath. Two. The beast leaped. With all his strength, Cato drove his spear upward, aiming for the creature's heart. A cry shattered the night. The beast stumbled, its powerful body crashing into the earth. Cato did not move, watching as its final breath left its body. He had won. The return. At dawn, the village awoke to the sound of drums. People rushed to the square, murmuring in wonder. And there, standing tall at the center, was Cato, his spear still stained with blood. Gasps filled the air. Behind him lay the beast, its great body proof of his victory. Baraka stepped forward, eyes narrowing. He had not expected this. "The beast is dead," Cato announced. His gaze met Baraka's. "Not by gold but by courage." The crowd erupted into cheers. The villagers, once wary of Cato, now looked at him with admiration. He was no longer an outsider. Amani, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt her heart swell. Fate had spoken. She knew in that moment that her future had changed forever. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the village of Nianda. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat, freshly plucked flowers, and the rhythmic pounding of drums. Women in brightly woven fabrics busied themselves with last-minute preparations, their hands swift as they decorated the village square with colorful beads and flowing fabrics. Children ran between them, their laughter mixing with the melodies of flutes and stringed instruments played by the village musicians. A celebration was on the horizon, a wedding that would unite two families in honor and prosperity. At the heart of it all was Amani, a young woman whose beauty was whispered about far beyond the borders of Nianda. Her deep brown eyes held the wisdom of someone who had long understood her role in society, yet a shadow of uncertainty lingered beneath them. Her long braided hair was adorned with delicate golden beads, a sign of her family's wealth and status. But no amount of finery could mask the unease that tightened her chest. Today she was to wed Jabari, a man of immense wealth and influence. He was respected among the village elders, admired for his generosity, and known for his powerful alliances. But to Amani he was a stranger. A man 3 times her age with lines etched deeply into his face, a symbol of experience and authority. She had barely spoken to him, yet she was expected to dedicate her life to him, to bear his children, to embrace a future built not on love but obligation. As she sat in her family's hut, staring at the ornate jewelry laid out before her, she felt a dull ache in her heart. She had been raised to understand that love was a privilege, not a necessity. Marriage was about survival, about ensuring that families remained strong and prosperous. Her mother had reminded her of this countless times. Still, a quiet voice inside her whispered, was this truly the life she was meant to live? Outside, the village continued its preparations, oblivious to Amani's turmoil. But fate had already begun to weave a different story. At the edge of the village, a lone traveler stepped into view, his dark cloak billowing slightly with the evening breeze. His presence was unannounced, yet he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked many lands. His face, partially obscured by the shadows of his hood, was unfamiliar to the villagers who caught glimpses of him. He was not from Nianda. He was an outsider, a wanderer. And though neither Amani nor the villagers knew it yet, his arrival would change everything. The village was still as the sun began to rise, its golden light casting long shadows over the land. The air was thick with anticipation, and the villagers had gathered in the square, whispering among themselves. The beast had haunted them for too long, and now one man had dared to challenge it. Amani stood near the center, her hands clasped together as she scanned the horizon. Had Cato survived? Was he wounded? She could not shake the anxiety twisting inside her. Every second felt like an eternity. Then a distant figure emerged from the forest. Gasps filled the air as Cato walked toward them, his steps steady and sure. Across his back the slain beast was slung, proof of his victory. His spear, now stained with blood, rested firmly in his grip. A cheer erupted from the crowd. "The hunter has returned," someone shouted. Voices rose in admiration as villagers rushed forward, eager to see the creature that had terrorized them for weeks. Cato let the beast drop to the ground, its lifeless body a symbol of his triumph. Amani felt her breath catch. He had done it. He had proven his strength, his worth, not with gold, not with words, but with action. Baraka's displeasure. As the villagers rejoiced, Mzee Baraka remained still, his lips pressed into a thin line. He had not expected this. In his mind, the beast was meant to be a problem solved with wealth, a burden carried by mercenaries and paid warriors, not by a young, unknown hunter. He stepped forward, forcing a smile. "A fine victory," he said, his voice smooth. "You have done well, traveler. And as promised, you shall be rewarded." Cato turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "I do not hunt for gold," he said simply. "I did this for the village." The words sent another ripple through the crowd. Baraka stiffened. "A noble sentiment," he replied, his tone carrying a hint of mockery. "But tell me, Cato, what do you truly seek?" "No man fights without purpose." Cato held his gaze. "A man fights for what is right." A silence fell over the square. The unspoken challenge between the two men was clear. Though Baraka still held wealth and status, Cato had won something greater, the respect of the people. Amani's father Django stepped forward. Unlike Baraka, his expression was unreadable. He was a man of tradition, a father who believed in securing the best future for his daughter. And yet, as he looked at Cato, he saw something he had not considered before. Strength, honor, courage. The village elders speak. The eldest of the village council, a man known as Babu Tembo, raised a hand and the crowd quieted. His eyes, aged with wisdom, studied Cato carefully. "You have done a great service to our people," he said. "You risked your life when no other would." Cato bowed his head in respect. "It was my duty." Babu Tembo nodded. "And yet you are not of this village. Why should a stranger risk so much?" Cato hesitated for a moment, then turned his gaze toward Amani. Their eyes met, and in that brief exchange an unspoken truth passed between them. "I am no longer a stranger," he said at last. "I am part of this story now." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The elders exchanged glances, each one silently weighing his words. Baraka, sensing the shift, stepped forward. "Honorable elders, let us not forget why we are here. This was a matter of duty, not sentiment. I am the one who offered the reward, and I am the one who shall see this matter closed." Babu Tembo turned to him. "Indeed, Mzee Baraka, your generosity is noted. But tell me, when the beast threatened us, did you step forward?" Baraka stiffened. "I did what any wise man would. I used my resources to seek a solution. And yet, it was not gold that saved us," Babu Tembo said, his tone pointed. "It was bravery. Bravery from a man who had no obligation to us, and yet, he fought." The elders nodded in agreement. Amani watched as her father remained silent, his thoughts hidden behind his stern expression. Amani's father reconsiders. That evening, Django sat alone in his hut, staring into the flickering fire. His entire life, he had believed in the wisdom of securing stability for his family. Wealth brought security. Power ensured survival. But today he had witnessed something different. His daughter's suitor, the man he had chosen for her, had stood back while another man, a wanderer and unknown, had risked his life for the village. For the first time, Django wondered if he had been wrong. Amani entered the hut cautiously, sensing her father's mood. "Baba," she said softly. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "You have always been a dreamer, Amani," he said. "Always questioning, always searching for something beyond our ways." She hesitated, then knelt beside him. "I only wish to follow my heart, Baba." Django exhaled slowly. "And if your heart leads you to ruin?" She met his gaze with quiet determination. "Then at least I will know it was mine to follow." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, to her surprise, he let out a weary chuckle. "You have your mother's stubbornness." Amani smiled but remained silent, waiting. Django sighed, rubbing his temples. "Baraka is a powerful man. A marriage to him would bring great benefits." "But would it bring happiness?" she asked gently. He frowned but did not answer. Instead, he stared into the fire once more, lost in thought. Baraka's growing resentment. Elsewhere in the village, Baraka brooded in his lavish hut. His servants moved cautiously around him, sensing his mood. The day had not gone as planned. He had expected Cato to fail, for the village to praise his wealth, not the deeds of a mere hunter. His grip tightened around his goblet. He would not be humiliated. He had spent too long building his name, too long securing his power. If the village elders thought they could change fate with sentiment, they were mistaken. Baraka would not let Cato take what was his. Not without a fight. The winds of change. As the village celebrated Cato's victory, the air was thick with change. Amani stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as her father spoke quietly with the elders. She did not know what he would decide, but for the first time, hope burned in her chest. Fate had begun to shift, and she was ready to meet it. Nightfall settled over the village, bringing with it an air of unease. The joyous celebrations from Cato's triumph had barely ended when whispers of discontent began to spread. Mzee Baraka, his pride wounded and his patience worn thin, was not a man who accepted defeat easily. In his grand hut, surrounded by his most trusted allies, Baraka sat with a scowl. His fingers drummed against the wooden table as he listened to the murmurs of his advisors. "This hunter is an outsider," one of them hissed. "He should not have such influence here." "He has already turned the hearts of the young against you," another added. Baraka's grip tightened around his staff. "Then we will remind them of the order of things." A wicked idea formed in his mind. If Cato could not be defeated in battle, then he would be crushed by the very traditions that had kept men like Baraka in power for generations. The false accusation. By morning, the village square was abuzz with tension. Baraka had summoned the elders, his voice carrying an air of urgency. His claim was clear: Cato was not the hero the village believed him to be, but a deceitful outsider who sought to dishonor their ways. "He came with no family, no ties, no history among us," Baraka declared, his voice sharp. "Yet he challenges our traditions, turns our children against their fathers, and whispers poison into the ears of our daughters." The crowd murmured, uncertainty spreading among them. Some nodded, holding on to the belief that outsiders could not be trusted. Others glanced toward Cato, their faces torn with doubt. Cato stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "I have dishonored no one," he said. "I have only spoken what is true. Should a woman not have the right to choose her own path?" Baraka's eyes darkened. "You dare question our ways?" "I question only what is unjust," Cato replied. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The weight of his words was undeniable. Tradition was sacred, but fairness, justice, was a force no elder could easily dismiss. Amani speaks. For the first time, Amani found herself standing before the village, all eyes on her. Fear clutched at her heart, but she forced herself to step forward. She looked at Baraka, then at her father, who stood silently among the elders. Finally she turned to the crowd. "All my life I have been told what my duty is," she said, her voice steady. "That my happiness must come second to tradition. That I must obey without question." She took a deep breath. "But is that truly the way of our ancestors? Were they not once people who fought for what was right? Who chose strength and wisdom over blind obedience?" Silence fell over the square. Amani turned to the elders, her eyes pleading. "I do not wish to shame my family. I do not wish to bring dishonor to my people. But I ask you, should I be condemned for wanting to follow my heart?" Her words stirred something deep in the villagers. For so long they had followed the rules, never daring to question them. But here was a young woman, brave enough to speak what many had secretly wondered. Was tradition meant to guide them or to chain them? The village divided. Among the crowd, some villagers murmured in agreement. "She speaks with wisdom," one elder muttered. But others shook their heads. "If we let this stand, what will come next? Chaos? Disobedience?" A younger man spoke up. "Is it disobedience to seek happiness?" An older woman snapped, "It is defiance against the ancestors." The division was clear. Half the village clung to the old ways, fearing the consequences of change. The other half saw a future where love and choice were not forbidden. Baraka, sensing the shifting tide, scowled. He had expected silence, obedience, but instead the villagers questioned him. He would not allow this. The ultimatum. Turning back to the elders, Baraka demanded, "If this man remains, he will tear apart the very foundation of our village. I ask the council, banish him before it is too late." A tense hush fell over the gathering. The elders exchanged looks, their faces heavy with the weight of the decision. Finally, Babu Tembo, the eldest among them, stepped forward. His voice, though aged, carried authority. "This is not a matter to be decided in haste. We shall meet in council and pass judgment by the next sunrise." Baraka clenched his fists, but he could not argue against the elders' decree. For now he had no choice but to wait. As the crowd began to disperse, Amani turned to Cato, her heart pounding. "I will not let them do this to you," she whispered. Cato smiled softly. "You have already done more than I could ask, Amani." But deep inside they both knew, the true battle was yet to come. The village square had never been so silent. Amani stood at the center, her heart pounding, every eye fixed upon her. The council of elders sat in their ceremonial seats, their expressions unreadable. The morning sun bathed the gathering in golden light, but tension hung thick in the air. Today tradition would be tested like never before. A bold stand. Amani took a deep breath. "I have listened to the wisdom of my elders all my life. I have obeyed my parents, respected my ancestors, and upheld the ways of our people." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Some were hardened with resistance, others softened with curiosity. "But today I must ask, what is the purpose of our traditions?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The chief elder, Babu Tembo, stroked his beard thoughtfully but said nothing. Amani's voice rose with conviction. "Are our traditions meant to guide us to a better life, or are they meant to trap us in a past that no longer serves us? Is a woman's worth measured only by the wealth she brings her family through marriage?" The crowd stirred. Women exchanged glances while younger men nodded subtly. Even some elders shifted uncomfortably. Mzee Baraka, his pride still wounded from the night before, stepped forward, his voice dripping with disdain. Do you truly believe you are wiser than generations before you? Do you claim to know more than the ancestors? Amani met his gaze without flinching. I claim only to know my own heart. Gasps filled the air. A young woman speaking so boldly, so directly to a man of power, was unheard of. A debate begins. The eldest council member, Babu Tembo, finally raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. His voice, though aged, carried strength. You speak with fire, child. But fire can burn as easily as it can warm. Tell us, what do you propose? Amani straightened her shoulders. I propose that a woman should have the right to choose her own path. That love, honor, and bravery should matter more than material wealth. Loud exclamations of shock and disbelief erupted. Some villagers shook their heads, others whispered in agreement. This is madness, one elder exclaimed. Love cannot feed a family, another argued. But neither can an unhappy marriage, a younger woman countered, surprising even herself. Amani's father, who had remained silent all this time, finally spoke. His voice was heavy with conflict. Daughter, do you understand what you are asking? This is bigger than you. Amani turned to him, her eyes pleading. I know, Baba. But I ask, what kind of future do we want for our daughters? One where they live as prisoners to duty? Or one where they can find happiness while still honoring their people? A heavy silence followed. The elders exchanged glances, the weight of Amani's words sinking in. A public refusal. Mzee Baraka, sensing his grip slipping, took a step forward, his voice booming. Enough of this foolishness. The arrangements have been made. Amani is mine to wed. The words sent a shudder through Amani. She turned to face him fully. In the clearest, strongest voice she had ever used, she declared, No. The word rang through the square like a thunderclap. Women gasped. Men stood frozen. Children clung to their mothers, sensing the gravity of the moment. No. Baraka repeated, his face darkening. You dare refuse me? Amani lifted her chin. I do. The world seemed to stop. Never had a woman publicly refused a suitor of Baraka's status. Never had a marriage arrangement been defied in such a way. Baraka's downfall. Baraka's face twisted with rage. You shame your family. You disgrace your ancestors. But before he could continue, another voice interrupted. No, Mzee Baraka. It is you who brings shame. All eyes turned to Babu Tembo, who had risen to his feet. His old but sharp eyes locked onto Baraka. You have sought to bend tradition to serve only yourself. You have dismissed honor in favor of control. And now, you seek to force a woman's hand against her will. Baraka opened his mouth to protest, but the elder raised a hand. You may have wealth, but you have lost the respect of your people. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Baraka, once seen as an untouchable figure of power, now stood alone. The elder's voice rang clear. Leave this place, Baraka. You are no longer welcome among us. A stunned silence followed. Baraka's face burned with humiliation. He searched the faces in the crowd, looking for support, but found none. One by one, the villagers turned their backs on him. With a final, seething glare at Amani, he stormed away, disappearing into the wilderness beyond the village. A new dawn for the village. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, a clap echoed through the square. Then another. Soon, a wave of applause rose, first from the young women, then the men, then the elders themselves. Amani's father stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Then he placed a hand on her shoulder. You have changed everything today, he murmured. Tears welled in Amani's eyes. I only spoke the truth. Babu Tembo addressed the crowd once more. This is a day that will be remembered. Change has come. Let us not fear it, but learn from it. The council agreed to discuss the future of arranged marriages, recognizing the importance of choice alongside tradition. It was not an immediate shift, but it was a beginning, a seed of change planted deep in the heart of the village. As the sun set over the land, Amani turned to find Kato watching her from a distance. A knowing smile played on his lips. She had chosen her path. And now the future was hers to embrace. With Baraka gone, the village was left in a state of reflection. The dramatic confrontation had challenged long-held beliefs, and though some were still uneasy, the air felt lighter, freer. Amani stood with Kato at the village center, the same place where she had made her fateful decision. Now they faced a different challenge, proving that love too could be a foundation as strong as tradition. Winning the village's trust. Amani knew that despite the shift in attitudes, not everyone was ready to accept the change. Some elders whispered that allowing a woman to choose her husband would lead to chaos. Others questioned whether Cato, an outsider, could truly contribute to their way of life. Determined to prove themselves, Amani and Cato devoted themselves to the village's well-being. Cato used his skills as a hunter to provide food for families in need, while Amani worked alongside the women in the fields, showing that she had not abandoned her duties. One evening, Amani's mother watched her daughter laughing with the village children, her face filled with a lightness that had been missing for years. For the first time, she began to wonder if happiness truly mattered more than social expectations. A father's doubt. Amani's father remained hesitant. He had spent his life believing that marriage was a transaction between families, not a union of hearts. One night, as he sat by the fire, Cato approached him respectfully. "I know I am not what you expected," Cato said, his voice steady. "But I love your daughter, and I will honor her as my equal. I will not take her away from her family, nor from this village. I only ask for the chance to prove that I can be the man she deserves." Amani's father studied him carefully. He saw no arrogance in Cato's eyes, only sincerity. With a slow nod he said, "Time will tell." It was not an approval, but it was not a rejection either. The village celebration. As the weeks passed, the village began to accept what had once seemed impossible. The elders convened once more and declared that while arranged marriages would not be abolished, a woman's voice in the decision would be honored. It was a compromise, a small but significant step toward a new way of life. To celebrate, the village hosted a grand feast, honoring both tradition and the changes that lay ahead. Amani's parents finally saw the joy in their daughter's eyes and realized that fate, indeed, had chosen differently than they had planned, but perhaps it had chosen wisely. Years passed, and Amani and Cato's story became more than just a tale of love. It became a legend. A life built on love and strength. Amani and Cato built a life together, their love growing stronger with time. They became respected figures in the village, not because of wealth or status, but because of their wisdom and kindness. Cato trained young hunters, passing down skills that would protect their people. Amani worked with the women to improve farming techniques, ensuring prosperity for future generations. Their home became a place of learning and storytelling, where young girls and boys gathered to hear the tale of the woman who defied tradition to follow her heart. A new generation. As they raised their children, Amani and Cato taught them the lessons they had learned, about courage, love, and the power of destiny. Their daughters grew up knowing that their voices mattered, that their futures were theirs to shape. Their sons learned that strength was not just in battle but in honor and respect. The elders who once doubted them came to see that love and tradition could coexist. The village, once rigid in its ways, began to understand that change did not mean disrespect. It meant growth. The story that never fades. Long after Amani and Cato were gone, their story remained. Around fires at night, elders told the tale of the young woman who was promised to a rich man, but whose fate had a different groom in mind. It was a story of love, defiance, and the belief that sometimes, the heart knows what even the wisest elders cannot see. And so, Amani's name became immortal, not just as a woman who changed her own destiny, but as the one who inspired generations to seek both honor and happiness in equal measure.